When you look at the physical universe, you see these totally undeniable binding laws. Gravity doesn't really care about your cultural background.
No, definitely not. It's impartial.
Right. And thermodynamics, well, it doesn't take your personal feelings into account. If you drop a stone, it falls. If you leave your cup of coffee on a desk, it's going to cool down.
Exactly. The physical world is just governed by these first principles. They're objective, they're mathematical, and they literally apply everywhere.
Yeah, but the second we turn away from the physical world and, look at human behavior, specifically human morality, that whole sense of objective certainty kind of just evaporates.
It really does. It completely vanishes for most people.
We immediately start talking about cultural relativism or like subjective feelings or religious doctrines. We end up treating morality as if it's fundamentally disconnected from the rigorous logic that governs literally the rest of reality.
Which is actually a really profound disconnect when you think about it. We tend to view moral frameworks as, well, either handed down from some divine authority or just completely arbitrary, like just a set of social customs that happen to be popular in a specific time and place.
Right, just trends.
Exactly. If you suggest to someone that a moral rule like, say, fairness might actually be as mathematically objective as the aerodynamic principles that let a bird fly, people usually look at you like you've completely lost the plot.
They really do. And, that tension is the absolute core of our deep dive today. So welcome to those of you listening. Today, we are exploring this really fascinating question that sits right at the collision point of science, anthropology, and pure philosophy.
It's a huge question.
It is. We want to know, can we find first principles for morality without relying on religion or just arbitrary cultural preference? We're basically looking for the social physics of human behavior.
I love that phrase, social physics.
It's a good one, right? And to do this, we have this incredible stack of source material that's going to act as our roadmap through this pretty complex terrain.
Yeah, and the centerpiece of our analysis today is this synthesized framework provided by Dr. Jorge Pires. Specifically, we're looking at his essay, First Principles, Deduction, and Empirical Convergence.
Which is just a brilliant piece of work.
It really is. And Dr. Pires has a super fascinating background. He holds a Ph.D. in bioinformatics, and he's a researcher who is deeply, deeply invested in mathematical modeling, biology, and critical thinking.
Right.
He basically dedicates his work to examining what science and secular reasoning can explain in domains that, historically, have been totally governed by religious belief.
Which means we should probably establish a clear baseline for how we're approaching the religious aspect of this today, just so everyone is on the same page.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
So, Dr. Pires' work and the sources he synthesizes, they explicitly operate on secular reasoning. When religious traditions or beliefs are brought up in these materials, they're treated strictly as historical, cultural, or, psychological phenomena.
Right, they're subjects for scientific analysis.
Exactly. They aren't treated as sources of authority. So for the purposes of this deep dive, our goal is just to impartially report and analyze the architecture of these arguments. We aren't here to endorse a theological stance, and we certainly aren't here to attack one either.
Oh, not at all.
We are simply unpacking a highly specific, very scientific, and rational hypothesis regarding the origins of moral facts.
And that analytical framework is so crucial because Pires is essentially acting as a translator here between two completely different academic disciplines.
Yeah, he's building a bridge.
He is. On one hand, he brings in this super ambitious empirical anthropological study led by Oliver Scott Curry, Daniel Austin Mullins, and Harvey Whitehouse. They actually went into the field to test a theory called morality as cooperation across 60 highly diverse global societies.
So that's our bottom-up empirical data, the real-world stuff.
Exactly, real human data. And on the other hand, Pires brings in the work of philosopher Richard Carrier. Carrier takes a totally top-down, purely deductive approach.
Pure logic.
Pure logic. He argues that objective moral facts logically must exist in all possible universes that contain rational agents.
Okay, and this is the hook, right? This is the thing that makes this entire deep dive so compelling for you listening. It's this epistemological coincidence that Pires identifies.
It's mind-blowing.
You have an anthropologist starting with raw human behavioral data in the mud, basically, and a philosopher starting with abstract cosmic logic in the clouds, and they both independently hit the exact same underlying mechanism.
They both hit the mathematics of non-zero-sum game theory. The anthropologist discovers that humans naturally evolve toward it, and the philosopher deduces that any rational being is logically bound by it.
It's just wild. So before we get into the cosmic logic of it all, I think we need to look at the ground level evidence first. Let's dig into Curry's anthropological data. Because if we want to know what morality actually is, we should probably start by looking at what human beings consistently reward and punish.
Yeah, that makes the most sense. And that is the foundation of Curry's morality as cooperation theory, or MAC.
MAC, right.
The MA theory basically argues that morality is not some mystical force, and it's also not just a glitch of human psychology. Morality is a collection of biological and cultural solutions to recurrent problems of social cooperation.
Recurrent problems, meaning stuff we run into over and over again.
Exactly. When human beings, or even our primate ancestors, first began living in close proximity to one another, we generated this massive evolutionary advantage. A group can hunt larger prey, they can defend territory way more effectively, and they can share caregiving duties.
But living in a group also creates constant friction, right?
Oh, absolutely. Constant friction.
Because resources are finite. You have to figure out how to divide the meat from the hunt, or who gets the safest sleeping spot in the cave, or what happens when someone just flat out refuses to help gather food.
And who makes the final decisions in a crisis?
Right. If a species can't solve those basic problems, the group just tears itself apart, and that whole evolutionary advantage of the group is totally lost.
And this is exactly where evolutionary biology meets mathematics. Curry's theory uses non-zero-sum games to categorize these very real problems.
Okay, let's break that down for a second. In a zero-sum game, the pie is fixed, right?
Right. If I take a slice, you lose a slice. Poker is a zero-sum game.
Got it. But biological life is dominated by non-zero-sum scenarios where cooperating actually expands the pie. Like if we work together, we both get a significantly better outcome than if we just try to maximize our individual gain at the expense of the other person.
Precisely. Over hundreds of thousands of years, humans developed biological instincts and cultural institutions specifically designed to navigate these non-zero-sum games. ME theory argues that these successful stabilizing solutions are what we eventually just named morals.
I love that. It makes it so tangible. And Curry's team maps this out into 7 very specific domains of human morality, which are derived directly from game theory and evolutionary biology.
Yeah, let's dig into the mechanics of these, because they form the absolute bedrock of the entire anthropological study.
Perfect. So the first domain they identify is the allocation of resources to kin, family stuff.
Right. From a strictly biological standpoint, this is rooted in Hamilton's rule of kin selection. In evolutionary biology, the fundamental drive is the replication of your genetic material.
Survival of the genes, not just the individual.
Exactly. Hamilton's rule mathematically explains why an organism would sacrifice its own resources for a relative. An organism shares a specific percentage of its genes with its offspring and its siblings.
So if a behavior costs the individual organism, but the benefit to the genetic relative is high enough to ensure the survival of those shared genes, natural selection is going to favor that cooperative behavior.
It's literally a biological equation. The genetic relatedness, multiplied by the benefit to the receiver, has to outweigh the cost to the altruist. If the math works out, the trait propagates.
And in human societies, that raw, kind of cold biological equation translates directly into the moral domain of family values. We view caring for our children or protecting our siblings and prioritizing our family unit as a profound moral good.
Yes. It's not just a biological urge.
Yeah.
We elevate it to a societal virtue. We say you ought to love your family.
Right. Okay, so what's the second domain?
The second domain addresses a totally different mathematical problem, which is coordination to mutual advantage.
Okay.
Game theory models this through coordination games, like the classic stag hunt scenario. Have you heard of that one?
I have, but let's explain it. In the scenario, 2 hunters can choose to hunt a stag together, which provides a massive payoff of meat. Or they can individually hunt a hare, which provides a small, guaranteed payoff, but ruins the stag hunt. Right.
Exactly. To get the big payoff, the stag, they have to deeply trust each other and coordinate their actions.
Because if I'm waiting in the bushes for the stag, and you get distracted and decide to chase a hare instead, I starve. The problem there is trust and aligned behavior.
And the mathematical solution to that game theory matrix is forming strict coalitions. You create shared signals, you wear the same colors, and you enforce mutual expectations.
Which translates seamlessly into the moral domain of group loyalty. We moralize being a team player, right? Or conforming to local traditions and defending the in-group, because those specific behaviors solve that coordination problem.
Exactly. Moving on to the third domain, we hit social exchange. which is arguably the most famous game theory scenario of all time, the prisoner's dilemma.
Oh, yeah. The collapse.
In any social exchange, cooperation is highly vulnerable to free riders.
Right.
A free rider takes the benefit of the group's labor, but they completely refuse to pay the cost.
Like the person who doesn't do any work on the group project but still gets the A.
Yes, and if a society cannot identify and punish free riders, cooperation collapses entirely because the optimal strategy for any individual just becomes selfishness. Why would I work if you're just going to steal it?
Right. And the mathematical solution to the prisoner's dilemma, which was famously demonstrated by Robert Axelrod's computer tournaments back in the 1980s, is conditional cooperation.
Specifically, strategies like tit for tat.
Yeah. You start by cooperating, and then you just simply mirror whatever the other person did in the previous interaction. If they help you, you help them next time. If they cheat you, you retaliate.
And that mathematical strategy gives us the moral domain of reciprocity, which is huge. It encompasses both positive reciprocity like gratitude, returning favors, paying your debts, and negative reciprocity.
Negative reciprocity being like seeking revenge or demanding restitution, punishing cheats.
Right. Under MA theory, revenge isn't actually a moral failing. It is a critical moral mechanism to deter free riding and maintain the integrity of social exchange.
That's so interesting. It forces the parasite to pay a cost, basically resetting the balance.
Exactly.
Okay, so that covers kin, coordination, and reciprocity. But what happens when two people just fundamentally disagree over a resource that physically cannot be shared?
Well, that introduces domains 4 and 5, which deal with hawkish and dovish contests.
Hawkish meaning aggressive, dovish meaning peaceful.
Right. When individuals compete over a mate or a specific territory, a literal fight to the death is mathematically disastrous for the species. Even the winner might sustain injuries that eventually kill them via infection.
Right, nobody really wins a death match in nature.
Exactly. Evolutionary game theory, which was pioneered by John Maynard Smith, shows that conflicts are resolved much, much more efficiently through asymmetrical contests. Basically, individuals display their fighting ability or their resource-holding potential without actually fighting.
So instead of trying to rip each other apart, they size each other up, they posture, they puff out their chests, they display dominance.
Yes, and the weaker party calculates the odds and submits before lethal violence ever has to occur.
Wow. Okay, so those two roles, the dominant and the submissive, yield two distinct moral domains, right?
They do. The hawkish display gives us the moral value of bravery, or heroism. We moralize fortitude, courage under threat, and the willingness to take on challenges.
And conversely, the dovish display gives us the moral value of respect. We moralize humility, deference to legitimate authority, and obedience.
Exactly. And both are cooperative solutions because they establish a stable hierarchy and prevent mutually assured destruction within the local group.
Okay, that brings us to domain 6, which handles resources that actually can be divided. Game theory calls this a bargaining problem. If two people find a cache of food, how do they split it?
The Nash bargaining solution suggests that the most stable cooperative outcome involves dividing the resource based on relative power, or, very often, just equal shares to avoid the protracted costs of a dispute.
And in human morality, this is obviously the domain of fairness. We moralize compromise, impartiality, equitable division.
Right.
Like the old rule, I cut the cake, you choose the slice. The mechanics of fairness are literally designed to eliminate the incentive to cheat.
It's brilliant. And the final domain, number 7, is possession.
Okay, tell me about possession.
If a resource is already claimed, conflicts can be entirely avoided if the population just recognizes the prior residency effect.
Yeah.
Game theory shows that deferring to the individual who arrived first, or who already holds the resource, is an evolutionarily stable strategy.
Right, like a bird will fight much harder to defend its own nest than an intruding bird will fight to take it.
Exactly. Because the incumbent has already sunk metabolic costs into acquiring it. They have more to lose.
And in human terms, this is the foundational moral domain of property rights. We moralize the concept of ownership, and we view theft and trespassing as severe moral violations.
So we have these 7 cooperative solutions: family values, group loyalty, reciprocity, bravery, respect, fairness, and property rights. Curry's theory makes a huge prediction here. He predicts that if morality is essentially just the expression of these game-theoretic solutions, then these 7 behaviors should be considered morally good in every single human culture on Earth.
Regardless of their geography or their history, that is a massive claim.
It is.
And to prove a universal claim like that, Curry's team had to avoid the classic pitfall of most psychological studies, which is relying on weird populations.
Ah, yes. Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic.
Right. If you only survey college students in North America, you aren't discovering universal human nature. You're just discovering modern Western norms.
Exactly. So they went to the EHRAF database, the Human Relations Area files.
What exactly is that?
It's an exhaustively detailed archive of global ethnographies, and they utilized a highly rigorous probability sample of 60 societies. This sample is specifically stratified to ensure true representation from across the globe. So you have Sub-Saharan Africa, East Eurasia, the Insular Pacific, North and South America.
So we're talking hunter-gatherer bands, nomadic pastoralists, all the way to complex agrarian kingdoms.
Yes, total diversity. They analyzed thousands of pages of ethnographic text, specifically searching for instances of these 7 cooperative behaviors, just to see how the local culture valued them.
And the data they pulled out is almost hard to believe. They found 962 distinct observations of these specific cooperative behaviors in the ethnographic records. And out of those 962 observations, 961 were assigned a positive moral valence by the culture.
That is a 99.9% convergence rate across completely disparate global environments. It's staggering.
Furthermore, they found that these moral values were distributed relatively evenly across all the different continents. It wasn't the case that, fairness was only valued in Europe or kinship was only valued in Africa.
Right, it was everywhere. And crucially, there were 0 societies, absolutely none, where any of these 7 cooperative behaviors were universally considered morally bad.
They highlight these amazing specific examples in the study, too. You have the Amhara people in Ethiopia treating loyalty to kin as the absolute highest virtue. You have the Kapauku in New Guinea enforcing a strict concept of fairness in their economic exchanges.
And you find the Tarahumara in Mexico treating respect for property as the absolute baseline for all social interaction.
The sheer consistency of the data just seems to deal a lethal blow to extreme moral relativism. This idea that morality is just a cultural blank slate.
It absolutely does. It provides massive empirical backing for the idea that human morality is constrained by biological and mathematical realities.
Okay, but I have to stop us here.
Right.
Because whenever someone presents a statistic like 961 out of 962, the immediate question for any critical thinker has to be about that single anomaly.
The one exception.
Right. If we are claiming these domains are the universal, objective rules of human cooperation, doesn't a single counterexample represent a major problem? If one society out of 60 looks at the math and says, actually, stealing is a profound moral good, doesn't that shatter the premise of the entire MA theory?
That is the exact pivotal question Dr. Pires raises in his synthesis. And he focuses heavily on that one exception because it forces us to understand how these moral domains actually interact in the real world. That single anomaly was found in the ethnographic record of the Chuk people of Micronesia.
Okay, so what exactly were the Chuk doing that broke the model?
Well, according to the researchers' findings, in Chuukese culture, openly stealing from others could actually be admired. It was given a positive moral valuation, which appears to completely violate the 7th moral domain, property rights.
Admiring theft just seems like a fast track to societal collapse. Why on earth would they culturally reward that?
To understand it, you have to look at the motivation and the context. The Chuk didn't admire, sneaking into someone's house in the dead of night to secretly take their food like a coward.
Right.
They admired open stealing because it functioned as a display of intense dominance and fearlessness. It proved that the thief was completely unintimidated by the aggressive powers of the person they were stealing from.
I see what's happening. So we aren't looking at a rejection of morality at all. We are looking at a collision of 2 different moral domains.
Yes.
The Chuk are prioritizing Domain 4 hawkish bravery and dominance displays over Domain 7 property rights.
Precisely. Pires argues that this exception is not a failure of Curry's theory, but a really profound validation of its complexity. Moral systems are not flat, rigid checklists where every single rule applies equally in every situation. They are dynamic systems of competing cooperative strategies.
If you live in an environment where your group is constantly under threat from hostile neighbors, demonstrating physical dominance and fearlessness might be the single most important deterrent you have.
Exactly. The social utility of proving you have Dangerous, fearless men in your tribe might mathematically outweigh the social utility of respecting property rights in that specific, limited instance.
And the ethnographers actually noted that in other contexts, when dominance wasn't actively being signaled, the Chuk did respect property.
Right. This shows us that a behavior is only ever judged as morally bad when it undermines cooperation. If violating property rights ironically serves a higher cooperative goal like group defense through deterrence, the moral valence literally flips.
It's highly contextual. It reminds me of the classic whistleblower dilemma.
Well, that's a great example.
Yeah, like if an employee steals confidential documents to expose a corporation dumping toxic waste into a town's water supply, society generally applauds the theft. We don't suddenly hate property rights. We just calculate that the moral value of fairness and group harm reduction vastly outweighs the company's property rights in that specific moment.
Yes, it is a continuous, subconscious calculation of game theoretic trade-offs. We do
Yeah.
it all the time. However, Pires is very, very careful to point out that even with this dynamic understanding, the anthropological approach has serious limitations.
Okay, limitations. Let's talk about that.
You cannot build an airtight case for objective morality purely on empirical human data.
Because of the historical noise in the data, right?
Yep.
Pires brings up Galton's problem. We should probably define what that means for our analysis.
Yeah, Francis Galton was a Victorian statistician who pointed out a fundamental flaw in comparative anthropology. If you observe the exact same cultural trait, let's say a specific marriage ritual in two different societies, you cannot automatically assume they both independently invented it due to universal human nature.
Right, you have to account for cultural diffusion. Did one society conquer the other? Did they trade? Did missionaries travel between them?
Exactly. Human history is incredibly messy. We have massive empires, vast global trade networks, and expansionist world religions that have spent thousands of years aggressively exporting their specific moral codes.
So even if Curry's team used a probability sample to try and pick 60 geographically isolated societies, you can never fully isolate a human population from the ripple effects of history.
You can't. If 40 out of those 60 societies were, at some point in their history, heavily influenced by the spread of an Abrahamic religion or incorporated into a massive Eurasian empire, then the fact that they all value property rights doesn't necessarily prove a biological universal.
It might just prove that an empire with a strong military successfully enforced its legal code across a wide territory, and those norms just became deeply institutionalized over centuries.
Exactly. It's the difference between a natural law and just a highly successful meme. And beyond the historical contamination, Pires points out a much deeper philosophical problem with relying solely on anthropology.
Which is what?
It's the gap between survival and optimality.
Oh, this is a critical distinction. Anthropologists can only study societies that survived long enough to be documented, right?
Right. But a society can survive for centuries while sustaining institutions that are highly suboptimal or even brutally oppressive.
You could have a society built on strict caste systems, widespread subjugation, extreme economic inequality, and as long as those systems don't immediately cause a total demographic collapse, the society survives.
Yeah, they scrape by.
But the fact that those moral norms existed for 1,000 years doesn't mean they represent the mathematical ideal of human cooperation. They might just represent a local minimum, a system that was just barely efficient enough to avoid extinction, but fundamentally flawed.
Yes. Therefore, empirical convergence, the fact that humans everywhere tend to do something, is incredibly powerful evidence, but it is not metaphysical proof. We cannot derive an ought purely from an is.
Just because human beings consistently engage in reciprocal altruism doesn't logically prove that reciprocal altruism is an objective, universal moral truth.
No, it doesn't. To make that leap, we have to leave the messy, empirical trenches of human history and enter the pristine realm of pure deductive logic.
Which means we are transitioning to the philosophical framework provided by Richard Carrier. If Curry's anthropology was the bottom-up approach, Carrier is providing the top-down architecture.
Yes, he is.
He isn't interested in what human beings happen to do in the mud of Earth. He is attempting to prove what any rational agent must do in any possible universe.
And Carrier's thesis is extraordinarily ambitious. He argues that objective moral facts exist completely independently of human culture, independently of biology, and crucially, independently of any deity.
He argues they are logical necessities that arise the literal moment a universe contains a rational agent.
To understand Carrier's argument, we have to look at how he totally dismantles the traditional religious grounding for morality. In a lot of theological frameworks, the argument is that without a God, there is no objective standard for good and evil. It's all just human opinion.
The claim is that moral laws are grounded in God's nature.
Right. But Carrier invokes a modernized version of the Euthyphro dilemma to show why that argument mathematically collapses on itself.
Okay, the logic here is quite devastating. Walk us through it.
If someone claims that we are morally obligated to behave in a way that aligns with God's nature, the immediate, inescapable philosophical question is, why should we value that specific nature?
Right. If a cosmic being commands, you must not steal, and you ask why, what is the answer? If the answer is simply, because I am immensely powerful and I will inflict infinite suffering upon you if you disobey, that is not a moral framework. That is just a hostage situation.
Exactly. As Carrier points out, obeying a cosmic tyrant out of fear of punishment is mere self-preservation. It has nothing to do with discovering an objective moral truth.
But if the answer is different, if there's a genuine rational reason to prefer God's nature, let's say we should emulate God because God's nature promotes the flourishing of conscious creatures, or because God's nature minimizes suffering.
Right.
If that is the justification, then the promotion of flourishing and the minimization of suffering are the actual underlying moral facts.
And those facts exist independently of the deity. The deity is simply a powerful being who happens to perfectly understand and align with those pre-existing logical facts. But the facts themselves, the mathematical rules of what generates flourishing, sit above the deity.
Wow. Carrier demonstrates that morality cannot logically be grounded in authority. It can only be grounded in rationality and the objective mechanics of the universe in question.
And to construct this framework, he relies heavily on the concept of hypothetical imperatives.
We usually associate hypothetical imperatives with Immanuel Kant, who actually contrasted them with categorical imperatives, but Carrier uses them as the absolute foundation of his objective morality.
He does. Let's break down the structure of a hypothetical imperative for the listener, because it sounds like dense academic jargon, but it's actually incredibly practical.
Yeah, let's simplify it. A hypothetical imperative is just a conditional statement, right? If you want X, you have an objective reason to do Y. The immediate pushback to that is that it sounds entirely subjective. Like, if I want to be healthy, I ought to eat vegetables. But if I decide I don't care about my health, the imperative vanishes. I have no obligation to eat vegetables.
Right.
So if moral rules are just hypothetical imperatives, doesn't that mean anyone can just change their goals and completely escape moral judgment?
That is the standard critique, yeah. But Carrier anticipates it brilliantly by examining what it actually means to be a rational agent. Let's use an analogy here. Think of orbital mechanics.
Okay, I love a good physics analogy. Hit me.
If you are an engineer trying to send a probe to Mars, there is a strict hypothetical imperative. If you want to reach Mars, you must burn your engines at this precise trajectory, at this exact velocity. Now, you are completely free to say, I don't care about reaching Mars. I'm going to fire the engines randomly.
You can make that subjective choice, sure. But the objective physics of the solar system will guarantee that you fail. You will miss the planet.
The mathematics of the universe dictate the optimal strategy for the goal. Carrier argues that for a rational agent, fundamental goals are not actually optional.
How so?
A rational agent, by definition, possesses desires and intends to achieve them. To achieve any desire whatsoever, an agent fundamentally requires survival, freedom from debilitating harm, and a functional understanding of reality.
Because if you don't survive, or if you are completely incapacitated by pain, or if your mind is entirely disconnected from the physical facts of your environment, you cease to be an agent. You cannot achieve anything. You are basically checkmated by the universe.
Exactly. Therefore, because any rational agent must possess these baseline goals to function, there will always be a set of hypothetical imperatives that mathematically override all other considerations.
Makes perfect sense.
Carrier's first premise is that true moral facts are simply the imperatives that supersede all others. When we say something is a moral duty, we mean it is the optimal strategy that overrides your petty, immediate desires.
So if your immediate desire is to steal your neighbor's resources, but your long-term overriding need as a rational agent is to maintain a cooperative society that ensures your survival, the imperative to cooperate supersedes the imperative to steal.
Yes. The moral fact is just a mathematically optimal strategy for your highest fundamental goals.
And this brings in Carrier's rationality clause, which is arguably the most important part of his framework. If objective moral facts are just optimal strategies, why do human beings commit so much evil?
Right, that's the big question. Carrier argues that moral error is fundamentally a failure of information processing. When a person commits a moral wrong, they're either uninformed about the facts of reality, they're misinformed, or they're just reasoning fallaciously.
They are running a corrupted algorithm, basically. They think stealing will optimize their happiness, but they're completely failing to calculate the long-term systemic risks to their social environment, or the psychological cost, or the probability of retaliation.
What you objectively ought to do is what you would choose to do if you possessed perfect knowledge of all empirical facts and utilized flawless logic to process them.
Pires highlights a fantastic historical example of this in the sources regarding voting rights.
Oh, this is a great one.
If you look back a century or two, widespread societal consensus dictated that denying women the right to vote was morally correct. But why did they believe that? They didn't believe it because it was an objective moral truth. They believed it because they were operating on catastrophically bad facts.
Right, they held factually incorrect beliefs about female cognition, emotional stability, or the sociological impact of women in politics.
They were reasoning from false premises. Once the scientific and sociological facts became undeniable, once we corrected the data input, our moral imperatives updated to match reality. We recognize that the optimal strategy for a flourishing society is to enfranchise all capable, rational adults.
The moral truth hadn't changed. Our ability to perceive the facts improved.
And we can prove this logic by looking at groups we still exclude, like we deny toddlers the right to vote. We don't do this out of malice. We do it because the empirical fact remains that toddlers lack the cognitive development to rationally participate in democratic governance.
The underlying moral rule that political power requires a baseline of rational agency is applied consistently based on the available facts. Better facts inevitably lead to better morality.
Carrier's ultimate conclusion is that moral disagreement is not a clash of equally valid subjective preferences. It is a symptom of ignorance.
If two rational agents in the exact same physical universe possess total perfection of knowledge and flawless logic, they would inevitably deduce the exact same optimal strategies for achieving their fundamental goals.
And those convergent optimal strategies are what we call objective moral facts.
So if we pull the camera back, look at what we have on the table right now. We have Richard Carrier arguing from pure deductive logic that rational agents must inevitably converge on optimal behavioral strategies dictated by the mechanics of their universe.
And we have Oliver Scott Curry's anthropological data demonstrating that 60 deeply diverse, historically isolated human societies have empirically converged on specific, optimal behavioral strategies for cooperation.
Which brings us to the core of Dr. Pires' synthesis, the epistemological coincidence.
We have a philosopher who started at the apex of abstract logic and reasoned his way down to the necessity of optimal strategies. We have an anthropologist who started in the dirt of human history and observed the organic emergence of optimal strategies. And the profound realization is that they both arrive at the exact same mathematical language.
They both meet at non-zero-sum game theory. Carrier's philosophy dictates that rational agents must solve problems optimally based on reality. Curry's anthropology reveals that humans consistently solve social problems using specific game-theoretic strategies like reciprocity, fairness, and kin altruism.
Game theory provides the invisible, objective structure that binds both the deduction and the observation, because the mathematics of a prisoner's dilemma do not care about your cultural background.
No, they don't.
The mathematical tension between cooperation and betrayal has the exact same structure, whether the players are Bronze Age farmers in Mesopotamia, modern-day stockbrokers in New York, or, I don't know, an undiscovered species of intelligent cephalopods on an alien world.
The underlying structure of the problem mathematically restricts which strategies can successfully solve it over time. To crystallize how profound this is, Pires introduces the analogy of the wheel. I think this is the most powerful conceptual tool in his entire essay.
Walk us through it. How does the wheel explain objective morality?
Okay, imagine two completely isolated human civilizations, separated by thousands of miles of impassable ocean, Civilization A and Civilization B. Both civilizations face the recurring physical problem of transporting heavy objects like stone, timber, food across land.
Okay.
Eventually, Engineers in Civilization A discover that carving a circular object and attaching it to an axle solves the problem beautifully.
Yeah.
1,000 years later, engineers in Civilization B also invent the wheel for the exact same purpose.
They both possess the same technology, but there was absolutely zero cultural diffusion between them.
Exactly. Why did they both invent the wheel? They didn't do it because of a shared cultural fad. They didn't invent the wheel because human psychology arbitrarily prefers circles over squares.
Right, it's not an aesthetic choice.
They invented it because the objective physical properties of the universe, specifically gravity, friction, and geometry, dictate that a circle is the most mathematically efficient shape for traversing a flat surface. The effectiveness of the wheel is an objective physical fact. It does not matter if a civilization believes in the wheel or not. Its physical properties remain true.
If a third civilization tries to transport heavy stones using giant wooden triangles, they will exhaust their caloric resources, fail to build infrastructure, and eventually collapse or be outcompeted by the societies using wheels. The universe just punishes the suboptimal strategy.
Pires maps this directly onto morality. He asks a highly provocative question. Are moral strategies like wheels? When 60 isolated human societies organically develop the moral concept of reciprocity or fairness, are they merely expressing an arbitrary cultural preference, like choosing to dye their clothes blue instead of red?
Or are they independently discovering the objective social physics of how conscious beings thrive together?
They are discovering the wheel of social interaction. If cooperation has objective mathematical properties, then different civilizations will independently discover the same cooperative solutions, driven by the sheer selective pressure of the universe.
But Pires notes that this realization requires the full synthesis of both our sources, right? The anthropology and the philosophy are entirely dependent on each other to form a complete theory.
Yes.
Why can't we just rely on one?
Because knowing that a wheel works based on physics is one thing. Philosophically proving that a rational agent ought to use the wheel to achieve a goal requires a completely different framework. Carrier provides the philosophical architecture. He logically proves that objective normativity, the concept of an ought, actually exists for rational agents who want to flourish.
But Carrier's high-level logic doesn't hand us a specific itemized list of what those moral strategies look like for primate biology on planet Earth.
He builds the blueprint, but he doesn't pour the concrete.
Right. Then you bring in Curry. Curry provides the empirical evidence of the actual candidate morals. He shows us what the social wheel looks like when humans build it.
But Curry needs Carrier's philosophical architecture to prove that these anthropological findings aren't just widespread historical habits, but manifestations of objective truth. Together, they form a cohesive, secular framework proving that human morality is an empirical manifestation of deeper, objective mathematical constraints on rational life.
It is a stunningly elegant framework. It completely bypasses the need for divine revelation by anchoring morality in the very fabric of logic and math. But this synthesis leads to a deeply counterintuitive conclusion.
It does.
When people hear the phrase objective morality, they almost always assume it means the rules are rigid, eternal, and completely immutable, like commandments etched into indestructible stone tablets.
Right, that's the assumption.
But if morality is essentially an algorithm designed to optimize flourishing based on the facts of reality, then if the facts of reality change, the objective moral rules must change.
This is where Pires' analysis gets truly mind-bending. Objective does not mean immutable. Objective means conditional upon objective facts. He illustrates this with a thought experiment he calls the resurrection universe.
Oh, this experiment completely rewired how I think about ethics. Walk us through the physics of this hypothetical universe.
Okay, imagine a universe where the laws of biology operate completely differently than ours. In this resurrection universe, if you shoot someone in the head, it does not terminate their existence. Instead, the moment they sustain fatal damage, their biological state instantly resets.
They just respawn?
Exactly. They respawn nearby, physically and psychologically intact. There's no lingering pain, no trauma, no memory loss, and zero grief for their family. It is a seamless biological reset button.
Like playing a video game where death has literally zero consequences.
Exactly like that.
Yeah.
Now, the philosophical question is, in that specific universe, is the act of shooting someone in the head morally equivalent to murder?
The answer has to be no, because the fundamental nature of the action has completely changed. You haven't actually caused permanent harm. You haven't destroyed a conscious agent or deprived them of their future.
Precisely. Because the underlying empirical facts of what the action does have radically changed. The moral rule governing that action also changes. In our universe, killing someone terminates their biological function, causing immense, irreversible harm to them and their social network. Therefore, in our universe, murder is objectively immoral.
But in the resurrection universe, the moral rule against shooting someone evaporates because the objective harm no longer exists.
This doesn't mean morality is subjective. The overarching, superordinate rule, a rational agent ought not inflict unnecessary harm on another, remains objectively true in both universes. The math doesn't change. What changes are the variables you plug into the equation based on local physics.
The abstract logic is eternal, but the specific on-the-ground rules are highly adaptable. And we don't need sci-fi thought experiments to see this in action either. Pires applies this directly to modern human behavior, specifically looking at sexual morality and consensual non-monogamy.
This is a perfect real-world test case. Traditional agrarian societies have historically demanded strict sexual exclusivity, often framing it as an absolute, unbreakable moral law. Adultery is historically treated as a profound moral failure.
But when you look at ethically non-monogamous relationships today, the moral geometry is entirely different.
Yes, for individuals who explicitly, honestly, and consensually negotiate a non-monogamous relationship, engaging in sexual intimacy with a third party does not constitute a moral betrayal.
Because the baseline facts of the agreement are different. No one is being deceived. The potential for social instability or disease transmission is managed through communication and modern medicine.
Exactly. What this reveals is that the deeper objective moral rule was never actually the rigid physical action. Never have sex with anyone except your primary partner. The deeper abstract rule, the mathematical constant is, respect legitimate commitments and do not deceive those you are cooperating with.
A monogamous couple sets the parameters of their agreement to exclusivity. If one partner breaks that, they are violating the objective rule against deception and breach of contract. A non-monogamous couple sets different parameters. As long as they adhere to those parameters, they are also obeying the exact same objective rule regarding honesty and commitment.
The abstract architecture is objective. The specific instantiation adapts to the factual agreement between the agents. It creates a moral framework that is incredibly robust, but also flexible enough to accommodate the complexities of human advancement and changing social environments.
But we must address the alternative. If we reject the Carrier-Curry synthesis, if we decide that game theory, rationality, and evolution do not ground objective morality, what are we left with?
Pires outlines the dominant secular alternative, a philosophical position known as emotivism.
And emotivism, when you really unpack the implications, is terrifying. Let's define it.
Emotivism asserts that moral judgments do not describe objective facts about the universe at all. They are entirely devoid of truth value. Instead, moral statements simply express the speaker's emotions, attitudes, or personal preferences.
So under emotivism, if I stand up and say, stealing is wrong, I am not making a factual claim about the destructive nature of theft on social cooperation. I am essentially just making an emotional noise. I am saying, Buddha's stealing, I dislike it.
And if you say charity is good, you're just saying hurrah for charity. It reduces all moral discourse to expressions of taste, fundamentally no different than stating, I prefer chocolate over vanilla.
The danger here, especially in the 21st century, is that emotions are highly hackable. If morality is nothing more than aggregated human emotion, then whoever controls the emotions controls the morality.
And we exist in an era of unprecedented emotional manipulation. Propaganda networks, social media algorithms, political demagogues, and targeted misinformation campaigns are all designed to bypass rational processing and directly stimulate emotional responses, usually fear, disgust, or outrage.
If emotivism is true, and a sophisticated algorithm or a bad actor successively manipulates an entire population into feeling deep emotional disgust toward a minority group, and that population decides that persecuting that minority is good, there is no objective ground left to stand on. You cannot say the manipulators are factually or mathematically wrong. You can only say, my emotional preference differs from yours. Morality devolves into a pure contest of power and psychological manipulation.
Which is exactly why Pires views the Carrier-Curry synthesis as philosophically vital. It provides a bulwark against the nihilism of emotivism. It anchors our concepts of justice and human rights, not in the shifting sands of human emotion, but in the cold, hard, rational requirements of game theory and cooperative survival.
It proves that a manipulator promoting destructive behavior is not just expressing a different preference, they are factually, logically, and mathematically incorrect about how conscious agents optimize flourishing.
They're trying to build a square wheel, and the physics of the universe will eventually tear their society apart.
This synthesis fundamentally redefines what we mean by moral realism. People get confused because they think if something is an objective fact, it must be a physical object. They think physicists should be able to smash atoms together in a super collider and find a glowing moral particle that proves murder is wrong.
That is a fundamental category error. A fact can be entirely objective without possessing physical mass. Mathematics is the perfect example. The statement, the interior angles of a Euclidean triangle sum to 180 degrees is an objective fact. But there is no physical triangle particle floating in a vacuum. It is a structural truth about logic and geometry.
Similarly, we haven't discovered a moral particle, but what we have discovered is that moral rules are highly convergent, mathematical features of rational organization. Curry's anthropology proves that when humans organize, the evolutionary pressures of reality force them to converge on these cooperative solutions. Carrier's philosophy proves that any rational agent, possessing goals and logic, must inevitably converge on these optimal strategies to succeed.
We have found the first principles. They don't require a supernatural lawgiver, and they aren't arbitrary cultural illusions. They are the mathematics of existence.
So we started this deep dive looking for the social physics of human behavior, and we found it. We have a blueprint built on evolutionary biology, non-zero-sum game theory, and deductive logic. But I want to leave you, the listener, with one final mind-expanding thought derived directly from the implications of Carrier's cosmic logic and Pires' focus on empirical convergence.
I know where you're going with this.
Imagine that in the next 100 years, humanity successfully creates a sentient artificial general intelligence. And imagine we upload that AGI into a vast digital simulation, an environment where it can literally rewrite its own physics. Or, looking outward, imagine that in 1,000 years, we finally encounter highly advanced extraterrestrial life that evolved in a completely alien environment, maybe floating in the atmosphere of a gas giant, or surviving in the crushing depths of a frozen moon.
The conditions would be completely alien.
According to everything we've unpacked today, their specific, on-the-ground moral laws might look absolutely bizarre to us. In a digital simulation where data can be infinitely duplicated at zero cost, the concept of scarcity vanishes, which means the moral domain of property rights, or theft, might not exist at all. For an alien species that communicates through a hive mind and doesn't possess individual biological bodies, the concepts of murder or bodily autonomy might be completely incomprehensible.
Their variables would be dictated entirely by their local physics and biology.
Exactly. But beneath the surface of those bizarre alien laws, they will still be driven by the exact same universal mathematical engines of cooperation. They will still have to solve coordination problems to achieve their goals. They will still have to identify free riders in their networks. They will still have to negotiate and bargain fairly to avoid mutually assured destruction. The specific surface rules will change, but the deep mathematics of fairness, reciprocity, and cooperation will bind them just as powerfully as they bind us.
They will be navigating the exact same objective moral architecture because they occupy the same logical universe.
So the next time you go about your day, the next time you hold the door for a stranger, or repay a small debt to a friend, or compromise in a heated argument with your partner, I want you to reframe how you see that moment. You aren't just exhibiting a polite cultural habit you learned in childhood. You are executing the objective, universal mathematics that bind all rational life together. You are solving the equations of existence. The diagnostic landscape of human morality isn't murky at all. If you look closely enough past the cultural noise and the historical baggage, it reveals a crystal clear mathematical equation. And the most beautiful part of this entire synthesis is realizing that the equation is us. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the mechanics of your reality, and we'll see you next time.